All right, thanks, Wendy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Bergantino. I'm the director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. And thanks for joining us on this Conditions and Outlook webinar for August. This webinar is being presented by my office today, along with the Bureau of Reclamation, the State Engineer's Office, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Weather Service, US Geological Survey, and the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, and University of Wyoming Extension. And today we'll be looking at the current drought status and climate conditions around the state, along with reservoir operations, the water administration, weather forecasts and outlooks, and also some fire potential looks. And at the end, we'll look briefly at how you can help report on conditions in your area and help us out as we continue this process. So let's start off with current conditions. And here is the newly released Drought Monitor Map. This came out this morning and it's as of Tuesday. And first, just a quick highlight of this link here, which goes to a 2.5-minute video that explains some of how the map is created. If you haven't already viewed it, if you're new today, it might be worth watching to get a quick overview of what goes into the map. Areas in red are areas that have deteriorated since our last webinar, and those in green are ones that have had improvements. Some monsoonal moisture across much of the south has led to some good improvements there, while the northeast, especially up in here, which has been missing out on the beneficial rains, we've seen some areas that had no drought category at all move down into the D0. So sort of a mixed bag across the state of improvement and unimprovement, if you will. Here is the 14-day precipitation statewide as a percentile. Large chunks of the state are at the 98th to 100th percentile, which means they're getting close to some of the most precipitation over that period of time that they've had. Across most of the state, except for, as I mentioned, Cook County, Northern Campbell County, far southeastern Sweetwater, southwestern Carbon, and then a bit over here in the eastern Laramie County and southern Goshen County. Looking at the same thing, but over the 90-day period, a lot of gray on the map, which means the gray just means that we're right about the median or what we normally are getting. The northern tier across here, along with dipping down into the central areas, are looking green, which indicates wetness, along with the southwest here. This chunk up here, where we're way up in the purples, is still remnants of the Yellowstone flooding and the precipitation they got in there, showing the signal still there. Some areas of concern, though, in southern Lincoln, a little bit into Sublette, Fremont, and then up into the Hot Springs, a little into Washakie area. And then, of course, the southeast is still on the deficit side in terms of precipitation, even going back 3 months worth. A little bit up here north of in Converse County is also on the dry side as well. Looking at the standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index, since this is a bit more involved than a simple precip map, so just a quick word about it for those who are new with us today. The SPEI is an index that's calculated using precipitation and evapotranspiration data so that it gives you a better view of the water balance compared to just looking at precipitation by itself. A small amount of precipitation when there's not much loss to the atmosphere could be more effective than when you have larger amounts of rain, but when the atmosphere is really thirsty and drawing up larger amounts of moisture. So it gives you, like I said, it gives you a lot more, a better view of the ins and outs of what's coming in, sort of a full water balance. And since it is an index, you don't see physical amounts listed, but rather values that range from a bit less than -2 on the low side to up over +2 on the high side. And the negative part of the scale just indicates dryness, and the positive side, which is in the blues, indicates more wet conditions. And these maps show 30 and 60-day time periods across the top, and 365-day or 1 year down here on the bottom right. And we're starting to see some concerning areas issued up here in in Cook County, Northern Campbell County, where they've been missing out. You can also see the wet side of things in the blue here, resulting from all the precipitation over the last little bit that we've been having here. And you can see things fairly even out, a bit blue here, but lesser intensity down in the southwest at the 60-day. Southwest still has some of that dryness reflected, or southeast has some of that dryness reflected. And then down in the 1 year, the dryness in the southeast is even more pronounced, indicating that we are having longer term deficits down in this area that they're not showing up as well in the 60 and 30-day, but when you look at longer term duration, they are still showing up as dry. So let's look at 14-day average minimum temperature. This is over the last 2 weeks. This on the lower right or lower left here shows the departure from average. We're mostly 3 to 6 above average, except some areas east of the Laramie Range, east of the Bighorns, where we're in the 6 to 9. High elevation, central parts of the state, but down here in the southwest where we're only 0 to 3 above average. And then crest of the winds, a little bit down by Flaming Gorge, we're actually up to 3 degrees below average over the last 2 weeks. Looking up here on the upper right, you can see this temperature as an absolute temperature. Nighttime lows are still above freezing mostly, little possible dips down here on the higher elevations, but temperatures have been, as you would expect, highest out on the eastern plains for nighttime lows, studying up into the 60s even. Looking at the same thing, but as a maximum temperature, again over the 2-week period. On the upper right here, we're looking at the actual temperature. We're over 60 degrees statewide, except again the very high elevations. And we're out in the 90s on the eastern plains with a few areas here in the mid to upper 90s that we're seeing here, these little darker areas. But looking at things as departure from normal, the far west, we're looking a little bit below average, up to 3 degrees below average over here in this western lower tier of counties. On the other side of the state, bit above average here, 6 to 9 degrees in Crook County, extending into the areas around there. The rest of the east is about 3 to 6 above average, whereas when you get to the western side, where you can see this sort of cooler gradient as you move to the west, we're about 0 to 3 degrees above average over the last 2 weeks. Looking at soil moisture percentiles, some improvements are seen here in the northwest and the east central part of the state. There have been some recent deterioration down here in the Sweetwater County, but a lot more gray on the map than we've been seeing recently. So that's a good sign in some of these areas. We just do have to keep an eye on this area down here in the southwest where we're starting to see these reds come back into things. Looking at site-specific soil moisture, the station is near the Campbell-Converse border. It's in the Thunder Basin grasslands. This is the kick-up that we saw last webinar, where following a 0.42-inch precipitation event, where it then comes off and levels off here. We didn't see much of a change in the deeper areas, but a very quick drop-off here. Then we had another event that sort of just leveled things off at the shallower depths, and kind of evened out over the next few weeks until we had a rather large event here, 5th through 7th of August, where the station received 1.73 inches over that 2 to 3 day total. And that really brought soil moisture up when that started soaking in. Not much of a change down here when you look at the half meter, but at the 40 centimeter, it's starting to go up a little bit, which we did not see with any of these previous ones. And then the shallower depths up, and then unfortunately dropping off really quick. However, about a week later or so, we had another event where we got 0.84 inches at the station. And finally, we're starting to see a nice lift up here in the half meter, but unfortunately, we're losing it very quickly at about the same level here as at the 10 centimeter. Not as bad at the deeper ones, which just goes to show that after you get a couple of these and you get that soil saturated, it's a lot better than just having one event come through. You need a series of things to keep things going, as you would expect. Now, 2 months ago, I talked about floods in the Northwest when we had the Yellowstone flooding, and this one's a little bit closer to the opposite corner of the state and closer to my backyard. And okay, actually, it was in my backyard. No, this is not my backyard, but it's very close. This is our test station at the greenhouse in Laramie. It's about, this photo is about a half hour before the precipitation started. You can see how ominous the sky looks. And we jump forward about an hour and a half, and well, you can see why I didn't need to water the garden the rest of this week here. Another half hour later, and rain's still coming down, but it's lighter. The waters have receded a bit from this high water mark that kind of has the little flotsam along the sides here. And then it continued like this for about the next half hour or so. There was no snow in this event, obviously, but the snow depth sensor was picking up the depth of Lake Laramie on the snowboard and recorded that depth was maximum about 6¼ inches just standing on the snowboard for a while. And this is the precipitation trace for the event. The gray is accumulated over, well, actually since the start of the chart, and the blue indicates 5-minute recordings of precipitation. And during 2 consecutive 5-minute periods, the intensity rate was at over, well, right around. One was a little bit below and one was right above 6 inches per hour coming down. So a rather impressive event for Laramie, and that's the highest total that I've recorded for the 20 years I've been in the Cocoa Raws program. So as I mentioned to one of the other people on the call, my eyes were glued to the window while this was going on. Now we'll go from flooding back to drought. This shows the percentage of Wyoming in each category of drought from 2000 to present. Currently, we are at about 109 weeks with some part of the state having D3 or extreme drought. The area of the state in the D1 to D4 category, the actual drought categories, decreased by about 8%, a little over 8% since the last webinar. And this is the lowest percentage of the state in D1 to D4 conditions since the 14th of July back in 2020. So that's a good sign. These maps that are available at this URL are also available at the county level, since as everybody knows, it's what happens in one county is not going to be the same as the opposite part of the state. And here's a zoom in on the previous timeline. This is from the start of 2020 to present. Now only 1.59% of the state is in extreme drought, and that's the lowest amount except for the very first week that D3 was introduced into Wyoming back was the 21st of July of 2020. So with that, I will turn things over to Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS, who will now talk about surface water conditions.
Thanks, Tony. Well, since in recent memory, this map looks about as rosy as it has in quite a while. This is an image from the USGS National Water Information Dashboard. In the colors on the dots, the green is normal, so that's the 25th to 75th percentile. That's a pretty wide range. The 50th percentile, or the median, would be your indicator of the central tendency there. The lighter blues are flows considered much above normal. That's above the 75th percentile. And then there's a few oranges on there, which I feel like I'm normally talking about, and that's below normal. That's less than the 25th percentile. So we kind of have a mixed bag of generally good looking conditions. If you surf around and look at these sites, most are above the median, with a caveat that, you know, this time of year, if your water supply is coming from the mountains without a large reservoir, a lot of diversions above your gauge, it's a time of generally lower water flow. So it looks like good conditions, but it doesn't mean there's a ton of water out there, because normally we're at somewhat normally low conditions for the year. So, but in general, things look good. Next slide, please, Tony. So just kind of bouncing around the state here, looking at the northwest corner, the North Fork of the Shoshone at Wapiti. You see kind of flows receding after the peak in early June. And here we are in late July, early August. You've seen a couple bumps and flows there from precip. So things are looking pretty good. They're above the median and just kind of receding into fall winter base flows. So, but in general, things in that northwest corner look pretty good and have looked pretty good for a while now. Moving over to the northeast, the Powder near Arvada, things are kind of hanging on reasonably well over there. You see this time of year, the Powder can nearly go dry. And that's a normal thing for the river there. But right now, flows are hanging more than 10 CFS and continue to flow with the bumps in the rain from that precipitation event. So things look all right on the Powder in that area right now. Moving down to the North Platte at the state line, it seems like when we bring up this gauge, and I've been talking about it, things have been really low now, and I'm sure this is all due to reservoir and water management. Flows are much above, or they're above normal, so a fair amount of water crossing the state line there. I'm sure that's purely due to management, I would assume. Going over to the southwest corner, the green below Fontenelle, things are below the median right now. It looked like some water had been pushed out there in June into early July, and then flows were dropped off quite a bit and been held there closer probably to the 30th percentile or so. So lower flows being managed there on that part of the green. And then just one more slide here, flows on the Smiths Fork near the border. Lately, I feel like I've been talking about the southeast corner having some pretty low flows. In this Smiths Fork kind of shows it still, it must not have benefited from that rain. There is a little bump there and right around the beginning of August, but kind of hanging right around that below the 25th percentile, the below normal. And it seems like it's kind of been like that throughout the calendar year. So not the water supply over there in that corner of the state, that specific gauge hasn't really benefited from the precipitation that's moved through. And then just one more slide looking at reservoir storage. It's generally, August is a time of low water supplies, and it's a time where we would think that if you got a reservoir that you'd be pulling on that storage. So we've seen decreases across the state. Surprisingly, most of the reservoirs have only decreased a few percent, but there has been some larger decreases in Palisades and Jackson, Buffalo Bill, Pathfinder, and Glendo. So those kind of select reservoirs have had some around 10% or more decreases in storage. So, but across the board, reservoir storage has been going down. So that's all I have. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Aaron. Unfortunately, we had a conflict arise with our Bureau of Rec speaker, so I will just actually kind of just go slowly through these as we move to our next presenter. But these slides, if you wish to take a closer look at them, will be posted on the Drought website after this, after the presentation is done, and there will be contact information at the end of it. If you have any specific questions related to these, you can contact the person and ask them of them. Into the Bighorn system. It's for the flow diagram showing reservoir operations down the Bighorn. And the Hydromet data system where you can go in and retrieve some of these data. And again, as I say, these slides will be included when we post this online, and you'll be able to take a look at them there. And so now we will move on to the State Engineer's Office, and Michelle Jess there will talk to us about water rights administration. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Jess, and I work over at Interstate Streams, stepping in for Jeff Cowley today. And so on the map shows all of the 4 water divisions in the state. starting in the southeast with Division 1, northeast Division 2, 3, and 4, going in a counterclockwise. Not a whole lot has changed since the last webinar, and I just would like to know all of the superintendents for the 4 divisions are listed, and their phone numbers are also listed. So if you guys have any more specific questions, feel free to give them a call. Division 1, again, we're in territorial allocations back to 1879 and the early 80s. Next slide. Not a whole lot has changed. Again, back to 1885's early water rights. Division 2, not a whole lot has changed. A lot of these are the same calls since the beginning of summer. Next slide, please. There is a new call on the Powder River and Wolf Creek from early August, and those go back to 1881 and 1902. There's a lot of water being moved due to reservoirs up in Division 2 as well. Next slide. For Division 3, again, a lot of these calls are from early spring and early summer. Priority dates going back to the early 1880s up until the 1900s. Next slide, please. Yep, again, not a whole lot of new calls on rivers and systems because a lot of people already know they don't have water. So next slide. Division 4, again, not a whole lot of has changed. A lot of these are still early summer calls that are still on the system, ranging from 1880s to 1930 priority dates. Next slide. There was a new one, I believe, that I added to the list for Corral Creek, but I think it's been under administration for most of the summer. Again, back to early territorial rights. And I believe that is correct. Again, so this is all the information for the superintendents with their name and phone number. If you have any more information, feel free to give them a call or me, but they know their systems a little better. So I think that is all I have for you.
Thank you, Michelle. Now let's go on to forecasts and outlooks, and we'll turn it over to Tony Anderson, who's with the National Weather Service over in Cheyenne. You're muted, Tony.
I gave you the video, not my voice. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist with the National Weather Service in Cheyenne. And looking out over the next week, the precipitation forecast looks, for lack of a better term, monsoony. We're probably looking at more moisture to the west in the early part of the 7-day period, and less so to the east through the weekend. That higher core of precipitation up in the Yellowstone area is probably not going to be a factor until later in the week, later in the 7-day period. So probably middle of next week is when we expect to see the bulk of that moisture come in, when we're expecting an influx of monsoonal moisture. So go ahead, next slide. Looking at the outlooks over the next 10, and then we'll look at the next 14 days. The temperature outlook is neutral for the kind of the middle part of the state. We've got a weak to moderate above normal signal in the western, let's call it third of the state. And then in the extreme southeastern part of the state around Laramie County, we've got a very weak below normal temperature signal. And then in the middle section of the state, it's quite neutral. Moving over to precipitation, the signal there is more pronounced. We have a moderate signal covering most of the state for above normal precipitation, which would reflect what we saw in the previous slide. It's a weak signal off to the extreme western edge of the state, but I would call it a moderate signal across the entire state. Next slide, please. Going out another 4 days in the analysis, the pattern shifts a little bit. The above normal temperature signal strengthens in the west. We have a significant moderate strength signal on the western border. But then in the southeast, we're entirely neutral. So there's no signal being observed as far as below normal temperatures. Looking at the precipitation outlooks, slightly different pattern than the previous slide, but the southern portion of the state, or probably the southern close to 2/3 or maybe half, is covered with a weak above normal precipitation signal. So that's probably picking up the same signal that we were catching at the end of the 10-day outlook, probably indicating that we're going to dry out in days 10 through 14. Next slide, please. Taking the same analysis out to 3 months, we have a fairly pronounced above normal temperature signal. It's strong in the southwest portion of the state, and it weakens to a weak signal in the extreme north and northeast portions of the state. Jumping over to the precipitation, not as strong a signal, but still there's a moderate signal for below normal temperatures or precipitation, excuse me, and a weak signal covering about probably 1/3 of the state, maybe half of, boy, my brain shut down, below normal temperatures. So weak signal for below normal temperatures in the north and a moderate signal in the extreme south. Next slide, please. Going back to something Tony had mentioned earlier, this is the precipitation stations in the Laramie from Saturday night. Parts of the town received over 2 inches, as Tony had mentioned. Maximum was his gauge at 2.73. This is approximately 240% of the normal monthly August precipitation for the official Laramie station. It's about 26% of the average annual precipitation. And we tried to do a recurrence interval analysis on this. We were missing some important data, but a very conservative estimate would put this in a 200 to 300 year return interval. And there's a very strong possibility that it may be well beyond that. I can't remember the exact number, but I believe the official station in Laramie got something like 0.6 of an inch. So officially it was a non-event, and unofficially it was a very large event that caused flooding in Laramie. We confirmed our flash flood warning, and if I remember correctly, over a dozen buildings at the university were impacted. So it was a large scale event by any measure. And that's what I've got for you.
All right, thank you, Tony. And next we'll have Casey Cheesebro with the Bureau of Land Management to discuss fuel status, wildland fire outlook. Casey.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'll run through this. We've left this slide, I think, in here all year just as a good kind of good overview of what we're talking about with some of the terms that we use here. But energy release component is a term that we use quite a bit when we're looking at kind of the trend in fuel moistures across the state over a larger area. And basically it's a composite value of these different types of fuel moistures. These are all considered dead fuel moistures, but we use these different size classes. You'll see there the 1,000-hour fuel moisture would be your 3 to 6 inch or greater than 3 inch dead fuels. So your logs, your heavier fuels, 100-hour fuels, 1 inch to 3 inch. So some of your bigger branches, smaller logs, 10-hour fuels being your 1/4 inch to 1 inch. So smaller twigs, things like that. Maybe some of your shrubs that have gone dormant. And then the 1-hour fuels being more of the grasses, maybe really small shrubs, things like that may not be dead, but maybe this time of year, maybe cured out. So those are some of the things that play into that energy release component, which we'll use in the graphs, kind of just combines all those together. We do have down at the bottom that live fuel moisture. And so obviously that's going to be different as you go from the tree species or the timbered areas out into the shrubs and the grasses. But generally this time of year, at least in the lower elevations, the grasses and shrubs, we're starting to see, even with the moisture we've had, pretty significant curing to where they'll start to act a little bit more like a dead fuel than a live fuel. So yeah, just real quick on that ERC, I have a note there. We generally talk about that as a percentile. So that's what we're looking at here in the next few graphs. Next slide, Tony. So these were the observations yesterday from the remote weather stations that are out there for the energy release component. Nearly the entire state's below the 90th percentile, which is very rare for mid to late August, where we're sitting right now. Normally we'll see a lot more of the 80th to 90th, even some of those maroon and purple dots around the state, but that pretty well jives with what we were seeing from the previous presenters up there in northeastern Wyoming, with some of the lack of rainfall up there that the rest of the state is seeing. Some of the areas, I look back at the graphic from a month ago, and western Wyoming saw quite a bit of a shift out there, and then through Casper, through the central Wyoming area there as well, due to those multiple rain events coming through. So one thing with the early, in a lot of parts of the state anyway, some of that earlier summer, late spring moisture that we got, we grew quite a bit of grass in a lot of areas. And so, that's the stuff that's starting to act like a dead fuel. It's curing out even with some of this recent moisture. So although things look pretty good out there today, this is kind of a snapshot. Could change, as soon as just a few days out if we were to miss some of those rain events. We'll take a look at a couple specific graphs here. So these graphs, I'd like to hope to do that for the next month, maybe, and put the other map up alongside these. But these group several of those weather stations for these areas. So this is a pretty good representation of the Laramie Range overall. And you can see there, we did get above that 97th percentile. And really, when we're talking fire danger, anything above the 90th percentile, we start to get concerned about, and that'll trigger some of the actions, ordering in outside resources, pre-positioning firefighting resources around those areas. So we did get there mid to late July, and then obviously we've had those rain events that others talked about, where you can see it drop off and come back up, and then this most recent rain just a couple days ago. So now we're well below average. Again, pretty odd for this time of year to be that low, but we'll take it. Next one, Tony. So we talked a little bit Western Wyoming, one of those areas where we saw pretty significant improvement here since the last presentation. So you can see we were right up there about that 97th percentile, and then pretty big moisture events there, dropping everything down again, well below average still. Starting to climb back up a little bit, but not, nothing of real concern at the moment. So see where we go from here, but next slide. Just getting more up into the Black Hills, and you can see, folks talked a little bit about that being a little warmer and drier, and so you can see we've spent a little bit more time this summer up there, even setting some new maximum values. Certain, the blue line goes above the red line a little bit there, so that's always interesting and of concern, obviously, but just a longer time frame above that 90th percentile and 97th percentile. But here, real recently anyway, pretty good relief. But again, a lot depends on what Tony was talking about, the Weather Service there, what comes in the next week or two. Again, really a kind of a snapshot here of what things look like today, not what they'll look like in 4 days. So this Great Divide Basin area, this would be a lot of southwest Wyoming, and you're kind of just seeing the same thing that we've talked about. Did get up into the 90th percentile, but so far it's been a relatively calm fire season down in that part of the world, and even slower here of late. So well below average, and they've been obviously the recipient of a lot of that monsoonal moisture coming up through out of the southwest and coming in there and keeping things fairly damp throughout the summer. So seasonal outlooks, these come out on the first of the month. So they're a little bit dated, but it does kind of jive, I think, with what folks were showing in some of their outlooks or their predictions that really up northeastern Wyoming and then very far southeastern being kind of those areas that look to be maybe a little warmer and drier than usual here as we go forward and through the rest of August and the rest of September. So with that, I just wanted to chat a little bit, where do we go from here? Obviously, a couple things that at play. I talked a little bit about the abundant grass with the amount of moisture we've had recently that we're actually seeing some green grass growth, but that could end pretty quick. As we know, August, September can be pretty warm, dry months. So we'll see what happens there, but we get into these shorter days and sometimes that can kind of help moderate that. But some of the larger fires in Wyoming have started in September and burned in September and October. We're quite a bit wetter this year than we were in those years where those larger fires burned that late. But we'll see. We talked about the shrubs, the shrub component, seasonal curing there. Even with the moisture, a lot of our shrubs or sagebrush, things like that, are pretty well into that seasonal curing and reaching near dormancy, or will here in the next month or so before we meet again. So see that really the big with the weather pattern we've been in is that heavy fuels, the 1,000 hours or the timbered fuel models. A lot of times we'll get one big rain event. People think, oh yeah, we're out of the woods. Everything looks great. But with that 1,000 hour time, what 1,000 hours means is that's how long it takes those fuels, pretty generally speaking, that's how long it takes those fuels to absorb the moisture out of the atmosphere, or if they get rained on, how long it takes them to really absorb all that moisture, and then subsequently how long it takes them to dry out. So one significant rain event a lot of times looks good for a minute, but doesn't really put a dent in those 1,000 hour fuels. But when we get these back-to-back significant rain events that soak into the soil, increase the humidities, especially there at ground level where a lot of these fuels sit, that's where we're seeing some really good improvements. So most of the timbered areas around the state looking pretty good there. I know last year State Forestry would do a little bit of an update as far as current fires, things that are going on. Pretty slow right now in the Rocky Mountain area. I didn't put a graphic in there, but it's really slow around the state. The only fire really being reported at the national level is still the Sugarloaf fire down in the Laramie Range there, but hasn't been active here for a couple weeks. I'm not sure why it's still reporting, but it is. But yeah, nice and quiet, really. We've had a lot of lightning, but lots of rain with it. The other good news nationally, we're a lot slower this year as well. So that means a lot more firefighting resources are available, especially for this time of year. I was looking back a year ago today, there was 34 incident management teams that were assigned nationwide, and today there's 12. So most of the activity is Northern California, Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, which is pretty normal, but even those areas are slower than they have been in recent years. And really, if we were to get a fire in Wyoming, the odds are pretty good that we're going to get the resources that we need, the resources that we ask for. Not a lot of competition out there for whether it's ground resources or aerial resources. So that's all I've got, Tony. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much, Casey. And now we'll talk about how the folks out there can get involved. But first, just put the drought monitor, the current drought monitor, back up, and just go back over a little bit. That we did see a lot of improvements. We did see some areas that are unimproving, and that we did lose a good significant portion of the D3 or extreme drought that was in some of these areas here in the western part of the state. So that's a good sign, and if some of this moisture continues, that'll be an even better sign. So 2 ways that you can help report conditions in your area. It's very helpful when people can take the time to be our eyes on the ground, since each of us only has 2. The first way is through the Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or the CMOR system, CMOR Drought. The URL is highlighted here on the slide. The system lets one submit reports dealing what you're seeing on the ground in terms of impacts in your area on a variety of categories that you can see across the top here. This batch here in the southeast has had one or two more reports added to it in some different areas. So that's some kind of confirmation that we do have some continuing dryness there, as was reflected on the drought map. You can include photographs when you upload your reports, like the ones here. And a single photo shows us what the current conditions are, but the problem with just the one photo is there's no real context other than it's what's going on at one point in time. So it's a little hard to tell how out of the ordinary those conditions are. So it's really helpful if you can do like is here, and you can include a photo from a similar angle that shows what normal, or even just here's what it looked like around this date and 3 years ago or something like that. And doing so makes the current photo tell a much greater story. And just the standard caveat that the photos you upload will be viewable by the public, so keeping that in mind. And the other way to help us is to become a CoCoRaHS observer. You can send in condition reports through the program as well, and those are displayed down here. These are the current ones on the map down here on the lower right. The original purpose of this network was to get a better handle on the variation of precipitation over real short distances. And so you can actually submit what your precipitation amount is, the actual amount in your gauge. And those are shown on this map up here on the upper right. And do that by setting up a 4-inch diameter gauge and measure and submit your precipitations each morning. So like on the form that's over here on the left. An empty gauge represents a very valid and very useful information. So if you join, please remember to report your zeros as well, because even if you don't like not getting precipitation and you get a lot of no precipitation in a row, it really helps us to get a better idea of what things are going on. Normally here we show on the left here what the observations are for the current morning. But today I decided to show an older map to get an idea of just how many people report on a really good day. This map is from the 30th of May, when we had just over 200 observations reported, with very few exceptions, like over here in Fremont County. Most of these observations have a precipitation value with them. So you can see more people report precipitation than when there's no precipitation. So that would be I'd like to see a map like this with this many points on it on a day when there's not as much precipitation. The right map here is the observers that are reported in the last year or so. And as you can see, not everybody reports every day. So the more observers we have, the better chance that a particular area is going to be represented. This is a zoom in on Casper. That's also no stranger to some good precipitation events. And this is from the 13th of August. And this shows the potential observers over here on the right and the actual observers here on the left. And you can see there could be a number of other observations filling in some of these gaps here. But there's also big areas here where we don't have a potential observer. And so obviously we do not get an actual observation. So just goes to show that we really need to fill in some of these holes so that we can get some better control when we're creating the precipitation maps around the state, and get so that those can be as accurate as possible. And finally, I've shown this map before, but this just shows the observations that are available from multiple networks across the state, regardless of whether it's CoCoRaHS or the Weather Service Co-op or ones like that. This is just sort of a conglomeration of all the networks that the observations that contribute to the maps that you saw in the preceding slides. So this gives you an idea that even with multiple networks involved, there are still a lot of open spaces in the state here that we just don't have any on the ground observations of what's following there. So if you know people who can help us out there, we'd love to have you as part of the program. And you can get a hold of me, or you can get a hold of Wendy after this, and if you want more information on it. Or you can contact me here, which is the list of folks who graciously provided information and talked with us today. I'd like to thank all of them again for their presentations. And on behalf of them, thank you for joining us today and listening to us speak. And so with that, we will move on to questions.